Welcome back to this edition of the Global Dream Circles podcast. I'm Lisa Gale, and today I was able to speak with a dear old friend, Stan Phillips. Stan is a mystic, he's a poet, he's an author, and just general all-around healer. Not only is his presence healing, but when he speaks, listening to the way he thinks, it can captivate the heart and the soul and take you right back into that place sideways in yourself, the place of the light, the place of the other world. I wonder, will you experience that when you listen to him talk today? He recounts a bit of the grieving process, having lost his partner recently of many years, Bernadette, and he speaks of a couple of other acquaintances and friends who have also passed back over to the other world, John Moriarty and John O'Donohue. Stan has been on this planet many years at this stage, well into his 80s, and has countless stories to tell and so much wisdom to share with us all. Unfortunately, the video was cut a little short due to technical challenges, but for now, enjoy this brief snippet with the one and only Stan Phillips. Benakti Agus Gra, blessings and love to you all.
Okay, I will do. Carry on. I'm in your hands.
Stan, how are you keeping?
Lisa, I'm absolutely fine. I'm enjoying life. It's a strange life I lead, being sort of, for the first time in my life, I live on my own, which started off as a sad thing, but has become a wonderful thing. I really do enjoy the freedom of being, I suppose, a sort of a late life bachelor. Really, it's wonderful. Lots of friends and lots of things going on. Lots of reading, lots of poetry, lots of music, lots of walking. Life is as good as it's ever been. Really is. What more could I add? And then I've got people like you in my life, people that special people who suddenly come back into my life after many years and enhance it in a crazy intercontinental way.
I wonder if you might want to talk about, because it is a little bit fresh, just the grieving process when a partner of many years passes on.
Yeah, we had a very special relationship, as you probably recall. She wasn't a complicated, but wonderful, wonderful woman with her heart in the right place, trying to save the world, but not herself. And she went far, far too young, far too early. And the grief, it sort of rips your soul out. You feel as if your soul has been ripped out and broken in 1,000 pieces. But then you think to yourself, I can either spend the rest of my life, weeping and wailing and gnashing my teeth and saying how the world is so cruel to me, or you can give it a value. You can give it a value by celebrating life, celebrating the astonishment of the unfolding moment, to live within each now with laughter and love and music and comedy and laugh, all those things that enhance life. So every time I laugh, every time somebody's kind to me, or I smile at a friend or talk with a friend, it is honouring the memory of Bernadette. And of course I wrote the book for her, which was a sort of a grieving process as well. I wrote the small book which went out, and it sold a lot of copies, and all the money for it went to charity, which was a wonderful thing. So that gave a value to her passing. And every time I think of that, it gives it an added dimension. Because the thing about life is her passing created what I call a Bernadette-shaped space in my life. And I can either fill that with tears and sorrow, or I can fill it with wondrous things. And I fill it with travel, with people, with, as I said, music and poetry and laughter, all those things. And that goes into my empty space. And every day you have a new space to fill. and you make that special. And you also make it special when other people who experience the same thing, because every relationship ends, as you know, in either death or divorce. It's something is inevitable. So how do we make that work? How do we encourage other people to get out there and give a value to each unfolding day in their life? It's not easy, but it can be done. And I cherish the girl's memory, but I cherish the space she's given me to lead a slightly eccentric life, which I suppose it is.
Yeah. If I could ask you maybe a bit of a vulnerable question, in those moments, the really difficult ones, how would you let it move through you? You know, the grief where maybe you didn't feel like you had a choice to make a mental shift.
What I do, Lisa, if something happens, it's like every day something is said. You hear a song, you hear a song that she would sing. She had a lovely voice. You hear something like that, or a poem that she once spoke to me. So what you do is you take that moment and you acknowledge that sadness, but then you do something that gives you joy as a result of that. So if I think of Bernadette singing on Grafton Street, which she did once in a public place, she got up and sang with a busker in Grafton Street. Every time I think of that, I will maybe make a telephone call to a friend. I will maybe put on a CD that I like. I maybe have a cup of tea. I go and do something. I go and watch the sunset. I will do something that gives me joy as a result of feeling that pain. And that gives that pain a value. It's not just pain. It's pain that inspires something special.
Yeah.
And that's how I live.
Yeah. That sounds really beautiful. Yeah.
The way I do it.
Yeah. Wisdom. I mean, I've always known you to be a man of wisdom and laughter, Stan. So, and you've done some really interesting things in your life. Some of them maybe you planned for, and some of them maybe you just found your way into. What are some of the more interesting things you've given your time and your energy into creating?
The best thing that I've written my books, not for money, but just for the pleasure of getting the words out there. I give my poetry away anyway. I think the best things I've done, I suppose, living in a deserted railway station in Devon, in England, which was wonderful. Meeting wonderful people, meeting astonishing philosophers and painters, and who just happened to cross my path. And I think life is not about what one necessarily does, but the people that come into your life. Like we spoke when we last talked about John O'Donoghue, who is a special person to you. And I don't know how big he is in America, but he was an amazing poet and a writer. And I think I told you the story about how there was a guy called John Moriarty, who was probably the greatest and wisest man that you've never heard of. He was a teacher of philosophy here in Ireland, and he moved to Canada, where he became a big professor in some college. And he taught, and he burnt out. And he had a book to write. He has several books to write. So he came back here to Connemara in the early 90s. And he worked as a gardener for a guy called Captain Watson, I think his name was. He had a big house in Connemara, a beautiful spot. And Bernadette heard this man talk once, and this was before I came into her life. And she went to visit him. And she just went on a whim and found him stood on a hilltop in Connemara overlooking the fields and the trees and whatever was there. And they spoke, and she spent the weekend with him in his little room in the big house. And she helped him write with the editing of one of his books. I think Dreamtime it was, which was a book about the mythology of the ancient sort of Australians, the Aborigines. Wrote that. She helped him with that book, and they became friends. And then we met and got on with life. And then suddenly we heard on the grapevine that he was dying of cancer. 3 sorts of cancer. He was quite proud of his 3 sorts of cancer, not just one. He had 3 sorts of cancer. So we were in Kerry, where he'd moved to. He'd moved to a little cottage at the foot of the Mangaton Mountains, which absolutely, I mean, if anybody who listens to this ever wants to come to heaven, to paradise, come to Kerry. It's a wonderful, wonderful county. Anyway, she heard he was at home in his little cottage in Kerry. I said, I must go and see him. So we got into the car on a lovely summer's day, I think it was in July, and we drove out over dusty tracks. We came to this little sort of 5-bar gate in the middle of nowhere, and we knew that was his place, so we opened the gate, we drove through, and the roads were sort of all up and down, all potholes, everything like that. There was nothing around except this little cottage that was at the foot of the mountains, with trees, and it's beautiful. And there in the garden, John Moriarty, who was a lovely man, he was tall, he had a wonderful shock of white hair, all curly, all over the place. And he was sitting there with another guy who was dressed in black. And we sort of turned up, and he greeted with Brenda, and he said he introduced this other guy, and this other guy was John O'Donoghue. Could you imagine? He just happened to be there on that day. The writer of Anam Cara and books of that nature. And we spent an afternoon with probably the 2 most profound thinkers of the 20th century, certainly in Ireland. They were the equal of anybody in the world. And we told stories, and we drank tea, and we ate cake, and we laughed, and it was the most astonishing time. And then we went away, and first I think John Moriarty died, and then John O'Donoghue died, and now Bernadette died. I'm the only one that's left of that magical summer afternoon at the foot of the Mangaton Mountains, where you sort of touched. When you look around the world, Lisa, at all the awful things, Gaza and the Ukraine, and all the unspoken atrocities that are going on around the world in places that nobody talks about because it's not convenient to talk about them. When you think about those things, and then you suddenly realize that there are people like this in the world. And as long as there are people like John Moriarty and John O'Donoghue in the world, and there are people like that, though the 2 Johns have gone, there are still people like you, for goodness sake. You don't realize it, Lisa, but you are an influence for good in this world. And as long as there are people like you in this world, civilization or society stands a chance. So we keep on fighting the fight and doing the best we can do, and being kind and loving people. And there's a chance that we'll get through.
Yeah, that was just beautiful. As I look out the window and the rain comes down, I was right there with you in that afternoon in Kerry having tea and cake.
John was he told the story. He was a funny man. He's talking about this old lady, and she said, I've only got 2 teeth, but glory be, she said, they're opposite each other, so she could chew. And then he told the story of his hair. He'd comb his hair, and the hair would come out in clumps because he was cancer-ridden. And he said, I took the hair off the brush and I sort of threw it out in the garden. And the next thing he said, I saw birds had taken the hair and woven it into one of their nests. And nothing is wasted. And that's the lovely thought that John's hair, which he was never going to use again, was being used in some bird's nest. And I think that's lovely. That's lovely. Everything has a value. It had no value to John anymore, but it had a value to the birds. Like Bernadette's death has happened, so this day has no value to her, but it has a value to you and me. So I've not thought about that before. That's an interesting thought.
It is one that I'll probably continue to brew on.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. I love that.
Well, that was a wonderful story. What a beautiful story. I only discovered Moriarty. I'd heard of him when I was over in Ireland, but I only really discovered his work and have been reading my way through Guinness. I was about to say Guinness, because it's a bit like that, trying to get through one of John Moriarty's book. You need a couple of utensils, a fork and a knife nearly to get through it.
I know. He wrote in such a convoluted way. He was such a simple man when you spoke to him. But when he wrote, he was so complex. His mind was awash with wonder. And you can't get that down onto a page. And really, if you write simply, you'll get it. But when you chatted with him, when he was in the bar with a glass of something interesting in his hand, he would tell stories to the little people, and it would be simple. They'd be laughing, He used to say, "You say it's raining there." Yeah, and that's what was the saying. He said, "A couple of good days of sunshine, and you'll forget when you had your last good drenching."
Yeah,
and that's true. When the sun comes out, like this, it's been sunny today for the last 2 days after weeks of awful weather. So you forget that awful weather and you go out and you sunbathe and you walk along a beach somewhere. So maybe we forget the hard times and contemplate the good times.
That was certainly my experience coming back. It did flood and rain one day when I was in Connemara last time I was over there, but it's not the day I really remember. I remember all of the sun.
Shall I tell you something about Connemara? I moved over to Ireland in 1995, and my mother had died maybe 10 years before, and I'd left a whole life and world in England to come over to be with Bernadette, to start a new life. And we went up to Connemara to visit where John had lived. He wasn't there, he'd moved on to Kerry by then. But we went to the house, we walked around the gardens, and we met Captain and Mrs. Watson and whatever they were. And then we came out, and my mother's name was Ada, A-I-D-A, as in the opera. And we came out of the house, and it was a deserted place. There were just trees and fields, and opposite over the road, there was like a telephone box, just one little telephone box, and a letterbox as well. It's an old tin letterbox where the locals would come by and they'd put their letters in, the postman would come and collect them and take them off. And on the letterbox, for some reason or other, with a penknife, someone had scratched the name Ada, A-I-D-A. And I'll never know why or how it was there, but in a way it said to me that somehow my mother was sort of saying, "That's okay, Stan, go for it."
Yeah.
And I thought, what's that? I don't know. I have interesting, I've dealt with things of clairvoyancy and spirituality for many, many years now. And I have a different take on many things about that. But that was, it was an interesting moment, because oddly enough, the name Ada has cropped up in many, many other places. As Bernadette and I have travelled around, we were in on the Costa del Sol. We'd gone to a place called Benalmadena, and up in the heights of Benalmadena, there's a Buddhist temple, a Buddhist stupa, which we visit on a regular basis when we go. And we came out of that temple one day and walked out past the little butterfly museum they have there. I walked onto the road to catch the bus back to where we were going. And there was a big poster on the side of the road. And on that poster, somebody had written, Ada. I have no idea why. She follows me around, making sure I stay out of trouble, stay out of mischief, like mothers do. You know you're a mother. So this is a funny thing that happens. And I say, I'm this sort of whole